Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling a story that's both captivating and incredibly disturbing. We're going to be exploring the case of the Southwest Rapist, a serial rapist gang who operated in Houston during the early 80s through the lens of one survivor's experience, Liz Lowe.
Okay.
This is going to be a tough listen because of the nature of these crimes, but Liz's story is one of incredible resilience, and it sheds light on some important issues about the criminal justice system.
Right.
Now, remember the 80s?
hmm
The club scene was wild,
Yeah.
and it's kind of eerie to think that lurking in the shadows were predators like this.
You're right. It's a chilling thought. And from an investigative standpoint, serial crime, especially when it involves a group dynamic like in this case, presents unique challenges. Understanding the psychology of these offenders is key. We're talking about a level of premeditation and coordination that's rare in sexual assault cases. It suggests a shared pathology, a kind of twisted camaraderie that's as fascinating as it is disturbing.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Liz's story starts in 1982 when she arrives in Houston, fresh off the Greyhound bus, ready to take on the world. She's waitressing, hitting the clubs, living that vibrant 80s life. But then on Halloween night, everything changes. Can you set the scene for us?
Imagine Houston in the early 80s, a booming city experiencing rapid growth and change. It was a time of both excitement and vulnerability. And unfortunately, that created opportunities for predators like the Southwest Rapist. They were known for their meticulous planning, stalking their victims, learning their routines, and carefully selecting their targets.
And that's exactly what happened to Liz. After a late shift at a popular club, she decided to take a shortcut through a dark area of her apartment complex. It was a routine she'd followed countless times before, but this time it was different.
This is where it gets really interesting because it highlights the element of surprise and how easily anyone can become a victim. Liz wasn't doing anything reckless, she was simply going about her daily life. But for the Southwest Rapist, this was a calculated opportunity.
So Liz is walking home, and suddenly a man pops out from the bushes, gun in her face, forcing her back to her car. He makes her lie down in the passenger seat, and he drives off. Imagine the terror she must have felt.
Absolutely. And remember, this is a group assault. The attacker mentions picking up a friend, and soon another man gets into the car. This group dynamic is something that sets this case apart. Statistically, group sexual assault is very rare, which suggests a deeper psychological connection between the offenders. It raises the question, what kind of shared pathology drives this behavior? What makes them escalate from individual acts to this coordinated group violence?
Those are some really disturbing questions, and it's hard to even imagine what Liz was going through. To help us understand the full weight of her experience, we have some audio clips of Liz recounting the attack in her own words. Wow, even hearing that small snippet is chilling. The dehumanization, the fear in her voice, it's heartbreaking. But what strikes me is that even in that moment of absolute terror, Liz was already thinking about how to survive.
That's a common reaction in these situations. It's called trauma response. The mind goes into survival mode trying to find any way out. Liz's resilience is incredible, and it speaks to the strength of the human spirit.
So after the assault, they dump Liz and her car in a parking lot. She manages to drive herself home, but imagine that drive. The mix of relief and terror must have been overwhelming.
It's a complex mix of emotions. The trauma doesn't just disappear when the physical assault is over. It lingers, leaving deep psychological scars. Liz later described being plagued by nightmares, vivid flashbacks where she could hear her attackers breathing.
It's a haunting detail, and it speaks to the profound impact of this kind of trauma. When the police arrive, they inform Liz that she's likely a victim of the Southwest Rapist. But incredibly, Liz wasn't their only victim that night.
This is where we see the opportunistic and predatory nature of these individuals. They had actually assaulted another woman just hours earlier. It wasn't just about fulfilling a twisted desire, it was about exerting power and control, and they were actively seeking out any opportunity to do so.
So we have Liz going through this horrific ordeal, and yet she manages to recall some crucial details about the attack.
These details are what eventually become the turning point in the investigation. Liz remembers that one of the attackers was called Jones. It might seem like a common name, not much to go on, but it's a lead. They also stole a unique necklace from her, something that could potentially be traced. And most importantly, Liz actually saw one of the attacker's faces when his mask slipped.
It's amazing how the human mind can hold on to these details,
Yeah.
even in the midst of such a traumatic experience.
Yeah.
And you're saying these seemingly small things were actually crucial in cracking the case.
Absolutely. They are the starting point, the threads that investigators could pull on to unravel the entire operation. It's a testament to Liz's strength and her determination to seek justice.
So Liz participates in lineups, both visual and voice, and immediately identifies Rory Keith Jones, the man who abducted her, and Robert Nickerson, the second attacker. The police now have their suspects.
Lineups are a powerful tool in these cases, and Liz's ability to identify her attackers both visually and through voice recognition played a key role in securing their convictions. It speaks to the power of memory, even when clouded by trauma.
Jones is indicted on multiple charges,
Yeah.
including aggravated robbery and aggravated rape. It seems like an open and shut case. So what happens next? Where does the story go from here?
Well, that's where the complexities of the justice system come into play. Plea bargains are offered. And this is where the case takes a turn that would have lasting consequences for both Liz and, unfortunately, future victims.
This is where it gets really unsettling, right? To understand what happens next, we need to introduce Judge Boris Beadle, who, while not involved in Liz's initial case, would later have extensive dealings with Rory Jones. But before we get into that, let's pick up the story with Judge Beadle's perspective in part 2 of our deep dives.
So we left off with Rory Jones facing multiple charges, and the prosecution seemingly having a strong case. But as we often see in the justice system, things aren't always so straightforward.
All right, plea bargains enter the picture. And this is where things start to get complicated.
Yeah.
Especially for Liz. Can you explain what a plea bargain is?
Yeah.
And how it played out in this case?
A plea bargain is essentially an agreement between the defendant and the prosecution. The defendant agrees to plead guilty, usually to a lesser charge, in exchange for a reduced sentence. It's a common practice, but it can be controversial, especially when victims feel that justice isn't fully served.
And I'm guessing that's what happened with Liz.
Exactly. As part of the plea bargain, Jones ended up with a 45-year sentence for 4 cases to be served concurrently. However, the sexual assault charge in Liz's case was dropped.
Wait, so the charge relating to the specific crime against Liz was dropped. That must have been devastating for her.
It was. Liz felt deeply betrayed by this system. She had bravely faced her attackers, testified against them, relived the trauma in court, and yet it felt like the true nature of the crime had been minimized. This feeling of being re-victimized is sadly not uncommon for survivors who go through the legal process. It's a tough pill to swallow, for sure. So Jones is sentenced to 45 years. But this is where Judge Beadle's experience becomes crucial, right? Can you tell us more about his involvement and this concept of civil commitment?
Yes, Judge Beadle, while not involved in Liz's original case, would later cross paths with Jones in a significant way. He was involved in the efforts to civilly commit Jones, which is a legal tool used to detain individuals who pose a danger to themselves or others, even after they've completed their criminal sentences.
So it's a way to keep dangerous individuals off the streets, even if they've technically served their time.
Precisely. It's often used in cases involving sex offenders, particularly those deemed to have a high risk of reoffending. However, in Texas at the time, there was a specific requirement for civil commitment. The individual had to have been convicted of at least 2 sexually motivated offenses.
And this is where that drop charge in Liz's case comes back to haunt everyone. Unfortunately, yes. That seemingly minor legal detail, the dropped sexual assault charge, created a significant loophole. On paper, Jones only had 1 qualifying conviction for a sexually motivated offense. The other was for aggravated robbery, which, while serious, didn't meet the specific criteria for civil commitment under Texas law at that time.
So because of that 1 drop charge, Jones wasn't considered a repeat sexual offender. It's incredible how one seemingly small decision can have such huge ripple effects.
It is. And Jones, being the cunning and manipulative individual that he was, recognized this loophole and exploited it to his advantage. He appealed his civil commitment, arguing that he didn't meet the legal criteria. And to everyone's horror, the court agreed with him.
So despite all the evidence suggesting he was a danger to society, Rory Jones was released from prison. When did this happen?
In 2011, after serving just 27 years of his 45-year sentence, Rory Jones walked free. It was a dark day for justice and a terrifying prospect for anyone who knew the truth about this man.
I can't imagine how Liz must have felt. She had been warning everyone that Jones would reoffend, that he was a danger to society.
She had, and she desperately tried to prevent his release. Liz even contacted the Texas Attorney General's office, pleading with them to reconsider.
And how did they respond?
Their response was, to put it mildly, dismissive. They told Liz that she needed to get over it. It was a shocking display of indifference and a complete failure to grasp the gravity of the situation.
So Liz's warnings were ignored, and just as she feared, Jones wasted no time in proving her right.
Sadly, you're right. Within 3 months of his release, Jones was back to his old ways, terrorizing women in Denton County.
This is where Judge Beadle, who had been involved in the attempt to civilly commit Jones, really gets a front row seat to the true nature of this man. What was his assessment of Jones?
Judge Beadle, after seeing Jones's subsequent crimes and the escalating violence, had this to say about him. Something was not right with Rory. He was just evil. There was no human kindness in him whatsoever. He was just evil.
Those are chilling words, especially coming from someone like Judge Beadle, who has dedicated his life to upholding justice.
It speaks to the profound darkness that Liz had encountered all those years ago, a darkness that the justice system had inadvertently unleashed back into the world. And sadly, Jones's reign of terror didn't end there. His post-release crimes became even more violent, culminating in a horrific attack in Denton County that almost ended in murder.
This is the attack that really reveals the depths of Jones's depravity, right?
Yeah.
And what makes this case even more disturbing is that a child is present during this attack.
You're right. This attack truly exposes the monster that Liz had warned everyone about. Jones attempted to kidnap a woman, brutally attacking her with a screwdriver, while a young girl, the woman's daughter, screamed for help. It's a miracle that the victim survived.
It's a truly horrifying thought.
Yeah.
And the presence of the child just adds another layer of depravity to this already awful story. So what happened next? How did the justice system respond to this final brutal attack? We'll delve into the aftermath and the complex questions this case raises about justice rehabilitation and the lasting impact of trauma on survivors like Liz in the final part of our deep dive. It's hard to believe that someone could just slip through the cracks like that. Not once, but twice.
It is a deeply troubling question, and one that highlights the need for constant vigilance and a thorough understanding of the complexities of these cases. The justice system is designed to protect society, but it's not infallible. And as we've seen in this case, the consequences of even seemingly minor errors can be devastating.
And in Jones's case, these errors led to more innocent people being harmed. The attack in Denton County, with that added horror of a child witnessing this brutality, was a turning point. It seems like the justice system finally had no choice but to hold Jones accountable for his actions.
That's right. This time there were multiple witnesses, including the young girl who had seen everything. The physical evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecution was determined to make sure Jones would never be able to hurt anyone again.
So Judge Beadle, who had tried to keep Jones incarcerated through civil commitment, now presided over his trial. What was the outcome?
This time, there were no plea bargains, no legal loopholes for Jones to exploit. The jury found him guilty, and Judge Beadle, who had seen firsthand the depth of Jones's depravity, sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Wow, a life sentence. That must have been a sense of relief, not just for the victims of this final attack, but for all the survivors who had been fighting for justice.
It was a hard-fought victory, a confirmation that Jones would never again be able to prey on innocent people. But as you can imagine, for the survivors, it was a bittersweet victory. The scars of Jones's crimes run deep, and the trauma will likely stay with them forever.
And what about Liz? Knowing that her warnings were ignored, that more people were hurt because of the system's failures, that must have been incredibly difficult for her.
It was a heavy burden to carry, but Liz's story is one of incredible resilience. Instead of letting the anger and frustration consume her, she channeled her experience into something positive. She became an advocate for other survivors, using her voice to raise awareness and fight for change.
It's inspiring to see someone take such a horrific experience and turn it into a force for good. It speaks to the strength of the human spirit and the power of finding purpose, even in the darkest of times.
Absolutely. Liz's story reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable trauma, there is always hope. There is always the possibility of healing, of finding your voice, and of making a difference in the world.
So after this deep dive into this harrowing case, what are the key takeaways? What can we learn from Liz's experience and the saga of the Southwest Rapist?
It's a story that forces us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our justice system and the complexities of dealing with dangerous individuals. It highlights the need for constant vigilance for understanding the nuances of these cases and for ensuring that legal loopholes aren't exploited.
It also underscores the importance of listening to survivors, believing their stories, and taking their warnings seriously. If Liz's voice had been heard, perhaps further harm could have been prevented.
And on a broader level, this case shines a light on the lasting impact of trauma, the need for greater support for survivors, and the importance of advocating for systemic changes that better protect the vulnerable.
Liz's story is a powerful reminder that while justice may sometimes be delayed, it should never be denied. Her resilience, her courage, and her unwavering pursuit of accountability are an inspiration to us all. I think that's a good place to leave it for today. This has been a heavy topic, but Liz's story is ultimately one of hope and the power of the human spirit to overcome even the darkest of experiences.